Greetings YouTube, Kudou-kun here, and holy cow, how lucky can one guy be? Not only do we get my favorite thematic set over here in the West, but we also get my favorite set to play. For anybody who doesn't know, Disgaea was actually my first competitive set, and to this day I still like playing with it. I sorta skipped out on Disgaea D2, so there's actually some cards here that I hadn't seen before either. For those who don't know what's going on, Disgaea pretty much got the Persona treatment, where they took all three of the Disgaea sets, they picked some key cards out of each of them, and they made a set, and the set is pretty hefty at 160 cards. So for those who don't know how this works, we're going to look at 4 cards from each color. They don't necessarily have to be the strongest cards in the metagame, sometimes I'll look at cards that are unique or interesting. If you guys enjoy the video and enjoy the set, then please leave this video a like, and if this video hits 100 likes, and somebody reminds me before I forget, then I'll do a follow-up video to this looking at 4 more cards from each color. And at 160 cards, there is a lot to cover in this set, so don't be shy with that like button if you like what you see. Without further ado, let's get to the cards. First card we're going to look at is Fuka Kazamatsuri, and she's pretty interesting. She's a level 3, but she can come out on level 2 if you have 5 or less cards in your deck. That's actually a running theme for this set. You'll see if you have 5 or less cards in your deck on a lot of these cards, and that's part of what makes the deck so much fun to play. Disgaea's main strategy is absolutely abusing stuff like Climax to count exactly how many cards are left in your deck, get to exactly 5 or lower, and then just go off with all of these interesting effects. You never have to suffer deck refresh penalties, you get full control over when and how you refresh your deck, and you can get some pretty neat effects out of it as well. In this case, we get Fuka. When she gets put in play, she gets a plus 3000 boost and plus 2 soul for the turn she's put in play. A lot of people are going to be skeptical. Ooh, she swings for 4 soul. That is way too much soul to be swinging for, but it doesn't have to be all bad. One of two things is going to happen. If your damage goes through, then that's 4 damage you deal in one attack. That's over half of a level bar, and that's pretty darn good. If your damage gets cancelled, then your opponent cannot encore that turn. No encores. That includes the pay 3 to encore character that characters are supposed to get by default. So either you're getting 4 damage, or your opponent is losing their entire front row. Next up is Overlord Mal. Now, a lot of people are going to be skeptical of Overlord Mal too, and he's another character that has just way too much soul. The interesting thing here, though, is he's 4 pretty much all the time, because he gets an extra soul for every card in your level slot, so he's probably going to be at 4. He has a Climax combo that lets you pay 2 to get rid of one of your opponent's front row level 2 or lower characters, guaranteeing he has a spot to attack, but getting that plus 1 is going to put him up to 5. I know this sounds awful, and trust me, it can be, but honestly, chunking your opponent's deck like that isn't always necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, trust me, you're not always going to be able to get 5 damage through, but it will happen sometimes, and 5 damage is almost a level up by itself. Not only that, but even if you don't get it and you happen to hit a Climax, that's a few cards off the top of their deck plus a guaranteed Climax off so that your next attacks can go through. If used correctly, I feel like Overlord Mal could be a potentially very fun, cheesy strategy to just cheese one level out altogether. Emizel, leader of Skos, is one of the brainstorms we're going to be looking at, and I honestly think it's the only brainstorm we need to look at. This is a perfect example of what we need our brainstorms to be. It only costs 1, and we can do it repeatedly because we don't have to rest characters in order to pull it off. Need to chunk 20 cards off the top of your deck? Then pay 5 stock and let it happen. I'll go over that later. So, the reason this is so important is 1, it comes out on level 0, so if we happen to get any climaxes early on from attacking, we can very easily get rid of those, and 2, because this has an effect that increases our hand and decreases our deck size. For every climax we hit, we get to look through our deck for a death character and put it in our hand. Admittedly, not all of our strongest cards are going to be death characters, but just the fact that we can look through our deck and put some cards from there into our hand, and then potentially deck refresh with those cards in our hand and not in our deck, just makes this overall a good choice. Emizel is probably one of the most important forms of brainstorm we're going to get, although I also urge you to look up Velvetore's Aesthetics of Evil, because he's probably the second best right after this one. He has 1 cost no rest brainstorm as well, but his gimmick is making our field super beefy. We're gonna round off yellow with a yellow event, of all things. So, it's a level 2, pay 2, and put a card from your discard pile back into your deck and shuffle. Now, we are going to choose climaxes pretty much every single time. It's 2 stock to put a climax back into our deck, and then it removes itself from the game, giving us -1 card in our deck. It's a pretty darn decent event if you ask me. Getting on to green, we're going to look at a level 3 called Prinagar X. Personally, I freaking love this card. I think it's really cool. Pure green decks are all about taking advantage of prinnies, and with this card, we actually have a way to make the prinny strategy a lot more viable. First of all, for every marker under this card, it gets plus 1500 power. Now, how do we get markers? Well, every turn you can choose one of your prinny characters and put it face down under this as a marker, and this gains +1 soul for the turn. If this card is in your front row center slot and your opponent declares any kind of attack on your side of the stage, then it becomes a frontal attack against this character. If you make this guy beefy enough, he just absorbs every single attack on your opponent's side of the field, and they're just going to lose their field every single turn. Now, that's kind of cool, but let's look at the things around this. First of all, if you're sacrificing a prinny to this every turn, then you are decreasing the number of cards that you have in your deck if you happen to deck refresh, because they're not going to the discard pile. Yeah, the prinnies do have to be in play when you do it, so this is technically a hands destroyer, but it doesn't really matter. The cards still aren't going to your discard pile, and if you deck refresh, they still aren't going back into your deck. Also, if all of your opponent's attacks are going to this character, then it doesn't matter what we have in the other 2 slots. So you can run something slightly weaker that you know would normally be destroyed, but now can't be destroyed because your opponent can't declare it as a target for an attack. When Tyrant Etna comes into play, then you pretty much deck refresh if you have 5 or less cards in your deck without taking the refresh penalty. After doing this, all of your characters get a plus 2000 power boost for the turn. Deck refresh whenever you want to without the penalty, swings for 2 soul, it has character discard encore as a base, and if you play it at the right time, this goes up to 9500 while your other 2 characters go up by another 2000. Pretty good times, and probably the best option you have if you're too hesitant to put red in your deck. Nemo is a pretty interesting staple choice. So, when this becomes reversed while battling, you can choose a card in your opponent's clock, put it in the waiting room, and then make your opponent clock the top card of their deck. Your goal here, obviously, is to try and make your opponent unwillingly clock a climax. And it's not cancelled either, it just goes straight to the clock. It's not dealt as damage, therefore it can't be cancelled. Admittedly, this is a pretty huge shot in the dark, but the effect is free, so you could run 4 of these in pretty much any Disgaea deck, and there's no downside to it whatsoever. Sometimes you're going to hit it, sometimes you're not. All good sides, no bad sides. It's pretty perfect. Last card we're going to look at in green is another event, the Winged Slayer. So, Winged Slayer is actually one of the most influential cards in all of Disgaea. This card is a pretty interesting divide, and it's a pretty interesting way to see if somebody has actually played the game long enough to get some experience with it. Because experienced players are going to look at this, see its potential, and think, wow, this card is absolutely amazing. While newer players aren't going to understand this card at all, and they're actually going to say that this card is awful. So I'll break it down for you guys. You forcefully level yourself, and then all of your opponent's front row characters get minus 3000 power for the turn. Obviously, you're pretty much going to want to exclusively use this on level 1 to get yourself to level 2, and you're only going to want to use it if you have 5 or more cards in your level slot already. Not only does this give you access to your level 2 play a lot earlier than you normally would, but it makes your opponent's field pretty much a guaranteed wipe. You also get the added bonus of putting a couple of cards from your deck into your clock, so not only does this let you clean your clock if you happen to have, let's say, a climax in there or something, but it also gives you the bonus of getting a little bit closer to that 5 card or less limit. All of this, and it's totally free. Yeah, if you play this like an idiot, it does pretty much guarantee you're going to lose the game, but if you play this like a true Weiss player, then it's actually probably one of the best cards in the set. Normally red would go here, but I'm saving it for last because it's the most powerful color. So, Desco, Last Boss Training. It has a base effect where if you have its climax in play, you can pay 1 to choose one of your opponent's cost 0 or less characters and put it back into their deck. This didn't used to be super relevant, but right now it's really relevant because of the current metagame. Everybody is running cost 0 cards as their level 1 lineup. You'll be very hard pressed to not find a target for this effect, especially if you're doing it off of Winged Slayer. It can also change into the level 3, which is okay I guess, especially because it's a healer. Next up is Killing Machine Sapphire. If you happen to have an Almaz in play, then this gets plus 1500 power going up to a 9000. This should be pretty simple, because even though I'm not going to show it here, there is an Almaz that actually gets Killing Machine Sapphire into play very easily. This also has a climax combo, where if you have its climax in play, then you can draw 2 cards and then discard a card. It's not the best, but this is pretty easy to pull off, and having a 9000 that swings for 2 soul and also has that climax combo is pretty okay. Next, we're going to take a look at Daughter of the Overlord Rosalind. First of all, it has an effect that's always on. The character opposite of this gets -1 soul. I don't see this as the best level 3 effect, but it is pretty good in some cases. For example, if your opponent is just throwing level 0s at this, trying to get that soul damage off, then it's going to go down to a base 0 soul damage, so if they don't trigger anything, then it's no damage dealt. This is yet another climax combo. If you attack while Overlord Summoning is in play, then you can pay 1 stock, and if you do, draw 3 cards and discard 1. Overall, that's a pretty good way to get a decent hand size, and again, it's also a way to get you closer to that 5 or less cards in your deck limit. Last card we'll look at for blue is Superhero Aurum. You take the deck refresh without the deck refresh penalty if you have 5 or less cards when this card comes into play. Afterwards, you can search your deck for a card with Overlord in the name and put it in your hand. It's funny, this is really important, but not because it's in blue. If you happen to be running a red deck with blue as a supplement color, then you can actually run this card to make your red deck a lot more consistent. You'll understand what I mean by that in just a minute. Finally, we're getting onto the red cards, which is pretty much the core of all of Disgaea. The red core staples are so important that I actually didn't even have room to look at or add any new cards. I pretty much just had to look at staples, and there wasn't even room for all of them. First up is Supreme Overlord Laharl. When this is placed from hand to stage, then you heal 1 from your clock. Well, that's pretty good. But its true effect is just below. You can put this card in your memory after it hits play to search your discard pile for any 2 angels or demons and put them from your discard pile into your hand. This is one of the cheesiest, most ridiculous cards in the game, and I love it. This card was actually banned for quite a while in the Japanese metagame, and possibly still is. I haven't looked at the ban list in a while. The idea is this. Normally you just have a level 3 that heals and can swing for 2, but with this effect you can get rid of this card from your deck, so it's not going back in your discard pile. If you deck refresh, it's not going to count against you. You get 2 cards back from your discard pile that you can play again that turn because this doesn't happen during your climax phase or anything. Again, this doesn't have a climax combo or anything, so you can just do it straight off the bat as soon as it's played. Then play the 2 cards that you just got for even more hijinks. If they're both 2 soul attackers, then you pretty much just got 4 soul off of a 2 soul card. If you happen to have 2 Supreme Overlord Laharls in your discard pile and you play 1 from your hand, then you're gonna go off and it's gonna be glorious. You pretty much get rid of the Overlord Laharl that you just played, you get back the other 2 Overlord Laharls, you play them, you can get rid of them, and then you get 4 more cards from your discard pile into your hand. Holy cow, it is a lot of fun. That's 3 cards out of your deck, so you're playing on a 47 card deck. It's 6 cards out of your discard pile, and you can pretty much deck refresh off of this, get the +6, and your deck is now very, very, very ready to get rid of some damage. The other cool thing about this is it essentially turns our discard pile into a giant toolbox. We can run 1s and 2s because when we hit our level 3 play, we can very easily just pick and choose which card we need for the situation at hand. I've missed you, my lord. Next up is the Beauty Baron mid-boss, which I just want to point out for a second, alright? So, in the English release, they changed it to pretty much the same as another card, the Dark Adonis mid-boss. And so there's pretty much 2 cards with almost the exact same name, and it made finding this card really difficult. But anyway, so you know the whole having 5 or fewer cards in your deck and then deck refreshing without the penalty? This card is pretty much where it all comes together. Although there are lots of cards in the Disgaea set that can do that now, this is the card that you want to be doing it with the most. So when you play him, if you have 5 or less cards in your deck, you deck refresh, yada yada, and the funny thing here is your opponent takes 1 damage. Now, this is awesome, because normally when you deck refresh, you have to clock yourself for 1 damage. But with your Beauty Baron here, you deck refresh, you put your deck down and you go, you know how I normally take 1 damage? Well, no. You take the 1 damage, please. Granted, the damage can be cancelled, but just as an idea alone, it's absolutely a hilarious slap in the face. With mid-boss in your deck, your opponent has to take the 1 damage from their refreshes and also the 1 damage from your refreshes. When this becomes reversed while battling, you can choose to return it to your deck and shuffle, which, you're probably never going to get any use out of this. I know I've never really gotten any use out of it. You don't really want him going back into your deck because then he can become damage. Why would you want that? Why is that even a thing? The only thing I can possibly think of is maybe like if you have 2 or 3 cards left in your deck at like the end of your opponent's turn, and you know you're going to draw into him for sure, and you need a buffer or something. I don't know. I don't think it's a very useful effect, but his first effect is definitely worth it. The best thing is if this is in your discard pile and you can pick one up with Supreme Overlord Laharl, so tasty. Next up is the worst Overlord Laharl, and I think they changed this card's name to like the most evil Overlord Laharl or something. I don't know. It's a weird change. When this attacks, if you have its climax in play, then this gets plus 3000 power, and when the battle opponent of this becomes reversed, you may deal 1 damage to your opponent. This doesn't seem like a very good card at first, but it's actually one of arguably the best cards in the set, as I said before. Right now, people are saying that level 2 is a dead level in Weiss Schwarz. Well, screw those people. We have worst Overlord Laharl. When you pull off its climax, it's a 10,500. When it reverses something, it deals 1 damage on top of its regular attack damage, and on top of all of this, it has Super Encore, so it's gonna stay alive. This is important for a few reasons. First of all, it's really nice to have this on level 2. Secondly, if you happen to play Supreme Overlord Laharl and pull out some worse Overlord Laharls using Supreme Overlord's effect, then you can play them, guarantee you have them both, play your climax combo, and then get 2 attacks off at 10,500 each with 2 extra damage, and it just gets really insane. Like, the 1 damage from all of your little effects adds up over time. In fact, there are enough ways to deal 7 1 damages in this deck that you essentially get a free level's worth of damage. And that's not including your attacks at all. Last, but certainly not least, is former Angel Flawn. Now, for some reason, Bushiroad made some demon cards that don't have character discard encore. I know, right? What were they thinking? Why are they trying to balance this game? So, to supplement it, we have former Angel Flawn. You keep one of them chilling in your back row, and all of your demons have Super Encore. And the card is a level 1 drop that's free. Just give invincibility to all of my level 1s, level 2s, and level 3s. That certainly won't do any damage to the game. All seriousness, this card is pretty darn amazing, especially if you happen to be running it with blue that has a lot of card draw. If you run this card in conjunction with the Brainstorm that lets you draw a bunch of cards, then your whole deck refresh strategy becomes even better, because you're drawing enough cards to support giving up character discard encore every time one of your characters gets reversed. Now, as though that all weren't enough, if this is put into your waiting room from the stage and you have 4 more climaxes in your waiting room, you can pay 1 stock, just 1, to put a character from your discard pile into your hand. There are 2 very, very, very stupid things about this effect. First of all, this means that Flawn can be an attacker. If you put her out, you can attack for the 1 damage, or you can attack an open spot for 2 damage, and if your opponent reverses it during their next turn, then who friggin' cares? You pay 1 stock, and you can totally just get a character that you need. And of course, the effect isn't quite stupid enough, so you can totally put former Angel Flawn back into your hand as the target, because this has to hit the waiting room in order for the effect to go off. Then you just play her again for free on your turn, and you either keep her in the back row for her intended use, or you just attack with her again. The second thing that makes her amazing is using this loop at level 3, you pretty much have an infinite attacker. I mean, yeah, eventually you're going to deck refresh, that's the whole point of the deck, but it's still a lot of attacks to be pulling off for just 1 stock a turn. And you're not really wasting anything from your hand to do it, so you don't have to worry about losing hand advantage. Just a beautiful card. Absolutely a must-have in every Disgaea deck. So that's pretty much it for the set review, guys, and what do I think? Well, Disgaea is still just as much fun as it always has been. It has variety, it's got a lot of fun, cheesy strategies, and overall, I think it's a pretty darn good set. Disgaea sort of died off as a concept in Japan, and that's because there's just so much being released over there that this quickly becomes overshadowed because they keep having to release better and better and better cards. But over here in the English metagame, I actually think this set is very powerful. This set is going to be sort of a divider for players who are newbies and who are experienced. Newbies are not going to thrive with this set at all, I don't think. because it requires a lot of very precise timing, a lot of knowledge of the metagame. It's going to be very difficult for a newbie to pick this set up and play it effectively. But on the flip side, experienced players are going to have a blast with this set. There are so many nuances that make this set powerful, and there's so many variations on the regular tournament-worthy Disgaea deck that you can make to tailor it to your playstyle or your play environment. While I do think blue could have used a bit more of a power boost, there's not necessarily a weak color in Disgaea. And while I think, yeah, red is pretty much the color that you have to run unless you're running a pure green Prinny deck, I do think how you actually run that red strategy is up to a lot of variation. I recommend the standard red, yellow, blue if you're going to run this competitively, but feel free to experiment with it. Now we hit sort of a problem. I do think this is a very good set. I do think that right now this is a very powerful set to play, and I do encourage players to play it right now. My one problem is that you have to understand that the English metagame is moving farther towards the Japanese metagame. They're releasing a lot of the good sets in Japan over here in English so that we don't miss out on anything. And there are very few sets that we're going to get exclusively, like the Attack on Titan set. And the reason this is a problem is because if the deck types that were so popular in Japan that they overshadowed Disgaea start coming out here, then the exact same thing is going to happen, and this deck is going to become obsolete the exact same way that it did in Japan. So while I do love this set to death, and I do recommend it to most players, I also have to understand the fact that this set is very much showing its age. If you pit this set against something like Unlimited Blade Works, it just barely kind of goes toe-to-toe with the ideas that Limited Blade Work is already set into motion. Powerful level 2 and 3 play, chipping away at your opponent's life bar 1 damage at a time. This is all just something that newer sets are starting to do even more effectively, and if we get 2 or 3 more sets from the Japanese metagame over here, then I don't really see this deck type kind of thriving and staying alive. Whereas I think a set like Haruhi actually showed its age a little bit better. But hey, pick the set up for now, pwn some noobs, and enjoy it for the time being, and hopefully I'm wrong and this set shows some longevity, because it is my favorite Weiss Schwarz set to play. You deck refreshed, take 1 damage. Now I deck refreshed, you still take the 1 damage, baby. Aw, yeah. But anyways, if you enjoyed this set, please leave me a like so that we can get a part 2 coming out. I've already got some ideas for what cards I want to look at next. If you have any thoughts on the Disgaea set, or have ideas for what I should cover next, then please leave them in the comment section below. And finally, as always, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudou news. Enjoy your card games, dude!